Welcome to the A.Little.Mental podcast, the place where you can find credible information, resources, and community to help you reach wellness a little mental at a time. I'm your host and founder, Morgan Reed, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's get into it. To Brittany, the body is more than a vessel where stories are held. She believes the body is a channel of memories, a sacred space for vulnerabilities, and an entity for radical inspection. A creative and mind-body-spirit approach to therapy is what clients will experience when working with Brittany. She is a queer Black dance and movement therapist, adjunct professor, community psychoeducator, and artist originally from Dallas, Texas. Brittany studied at Drexel University, where she obtained her master's degree in dance and movement therapy and counseling. Her therapeutic framework is grounded in relational, cultural, narrative, and social justice approaches. She has experience working in inpatient behavioral health and community-based mental health facilities. Brittany seeks to edify clients by honoring them as experts in their own lives. She embraces the rawness in her clients' stories and encourages them to show up authentically and unapologetically. Brittany is passionate about normalizing discussions around sensuality, sexuality, sexual trauma, pleasure, and identity in the Black community. Her focus is on prioritizing the experiences of LGBTQIA+ folks by creating therapeutic spaces that allow them to feel safe. Brittany loves working with folks of all ages. She specializes in working with folks who are experiencing forms of anger, abandonment, body image issues, depression, grief and loss, workplace discrimination, trauma, religious and sexual shame, and relationships. Outside of the therapeutic space, you can find Brittany indulging in the art of calligraphy, taking dance classes, making flower arrangements, collecting vinyl, decorating spaces, and spending time with her loved ones. Brittany, thank you so much for being here today. I am so excited to have this conversation. But before we get started, is there anything else you want folks to know about you, about this topic, or about you and your professional life?
I'm just really excited to be here and to talk so freely about the topic at hand.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm just excited, and we'll see where it goes.
Amazing. Yes, I cannot wait to hear what you have to say, what we get into. But maybe to start us off, let's start from the tippy top. Like the title says, there's a lot of different letters. I call it the alphabet soup of mental health. And when it comes to professionals and things like that, can you give kind of like just a basic understanding of like what you can do as a mental health professional, as a therapist, like what you can and cannot do?
There are a few folks that don't really understand what a dance movement therapist is. So I am, in fact, a dance movement therapist, and I am pre-licensed. So I'm working on my licensed professional counselor credential. So as a dance movement therapist, I am registered under the American Dance Therapy Association. So I went to school, I got a master's degree, and the degree was in dance movement therapy and counseling. And what that means is that all of my coursework was geared towards me being a counselor. So all the coursework that I am taking in my master's program basically is attached to the things that I'm going to need to get licensed in the state of Pennsylvania.
Sure.
So what I do as a dance movement therapist, again, using movement as a vehicle for expression. So I'm not just working with the thoughts and feelings, but I'm also working with the mind, body, and spirit. So taking a holistic approach to how we see counseling, how we see therapy. I like saying I hold space. I don't like saying I facilitate sessions, but I like to say I hold space for individuals, couples, those in relationships, those who are married, even families. So I conduct and hold space for these individuals. So my role is to assess specific mental health issues, needs, and also recognize if there needs to be a diagnosis. So sometimes diagnosing can get tricky because you want to make sure that you're within your scope of practice. So me being a pre-licensed therapist, for me, it's really important that I have a licensed supervisor who's also accompanying me when I am making these clinical decisions. When I am saying, hey, I feel like this person might be diagnosed with this mental health diagnosis versus this one.
Sure.
So it's important. And as a therapist, I don't like to just keep things in the realm of this therapeutic space. I also like doing community work. Community psychoeducation is specifically important as we heal as a community. Absolutely. I also offer workshops. I'm actually going to be presenting at my first conference that I'm really excited about. So being a movement therapist has afforded me a lot of opportunities to really advocate for mental health, specifically with Black and Brown folks. So, hopefully I answered your question.
No, you did. If anything, it brought me more questions, but I think it was helpful for you to name that you are a dance and movement therapist, but you are also considered pre-licensed as a licensed professional counselor, which may be something folks may see a bit more familiar, or like LPC is typically what that looks like after somebody's name. But it means that you are still aligned with, like you said, the workload, the coursework, because to become licensed, you do have to have a certain type of coursework, certain amount of coursework, certain amount of clinical hours, and pass the actual exam. So like you're still going through all that process. You've been through that process. And it's a lot. I've been through some of that process, and it's, through my master's, and it's a doozy.
I am in the process of it all. Like I just submitted all my paperwork.
Oh, wow.
So I am just waiting on them to say, hey, you have your LLC.
Check. Wow. So you're literally right there at the end.
I think it's something that we don't talk about as much when it comes to us graduating from a master's program. We say, oh yeah, take your NCE, which is a test we have to take to be
national
licensed.
Counseling exam. Yep.
There's so many things that you have to know, like making sure that your supervisor is actually in a scope of practice. Yeah. And has been licensed for 5 years in order to get, and again, it varies based off of the state that you're in. So it's very important. I tell people all the time, it's very important that you recognize all the requirements that you need based off of your state. Because I can be a licensed professional counselor in the state of Pennsylvania. I can't practice the same way, or it doesn't look the same way in New York, in Delaware. So that's something to be really mindful of as well.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that up too, about, just because you're licensed in one state doesn't necessarily mean you're able to practice in another. And I think for folks who are looking for therapists, who are trying to piecemeal through, they might find somebody who they love, whether it's on social media or, in one of like the directories. But if they're not licensed to practice in your state, they are technically not able to work with you. That's like that's an ethical, legal thing. Like they are not actually able to work with you. But I wanted to come back around to how you incorporate dance and movement into therapy and how that works with talk therapy, right? Like oftentimes folks, when you think about therapy, you think about somebody sitting in a chair, you sitting on a couch or in a virtual space. And where do you typically have your counseling sessions? Is it in an office? Is it are you in a dance studio, or y'all like stretching? Like, well, how does a typical therapy session look with you? And how do people end up finding you to do these things?
I love that question. And it's so funny because people get dance movement therapists and somatic practitioners mixed up with physical therapists. I get it all the time. So you're a physical therapist. And I'm like, no. So movement therapists can literally hold space in an array of different places. So we have dance movement therapists who are in hospitals. We have dance movement therapists who are in school systems, like working and connecting with school counselors, or maybe they are the counselor on staff. We have folks who are doing private practice work. There are so many different spaces that we occupy. And presently, I do a lot of my work virtually. So you're just like, how does that work? How do you move virtually? So as the pandemic happened and we are kind of continuously navigating this pandemic, more people are wanting more access. And that means virtual spaces to be able to practice movement therapy. So as a movement therapist, one thing that's really important to me is building relationship virtually. So how can I build that virtually? Some of the things that we might do is start with some grounding techniques. Where is your breath coming from? And when I talk about movement therapy, I want to be clear that movement therapy is not just for able-bodied folks or dancers or people who are of a certain age. Movement therapy is for everyone. And one thing that I love about movement therapy is that we're not just talking. We're actually allowing our body to experience the things that are going on in our body, the things that we have been holding for years, the things that we find ourselves not really tapping into if we were just talking about it. because our mind can be thinking something and our body can be experiencing something totally different. So as movement therapists, we are literally saying, hey, mind, body, and spirit, it's all interconnected. So we need to figure out what's happening. So again, a lot of the work that I do is virtual. However, I do also work at a university as an adjunct professor. So I do get an opportunity on Mondays and Fridays, starting in September, October, to do community dance movement therapy that's in person. That is so important because I am really in it. When you're doing community work, you are in it, like you're in the community. You're not in a specific system. You're literally working with people who make up the community. So it's really important to focus on what's happening in the space. What do they need? So I might have an idea that I say, hey, let's do this today. And the community might be like, we need to do this today. Like, we need to focus on this aspect. So as a movement therapist, I'm in tune with that. And we might do a warm up that calls us to move a little bit. So I say, hey, say your name, say an emotion or something that you're feeling, and a movement that connects with that. And after they share those things, I call the group to also mirror those movements. So we call it mirroring. So it looks differently depending on what creative art realm you're going for. But as a movement therapist, we call it mirroring. And that is ability to see my movement on somebody else's movement. And doing that actually fosters empathy and connection. So knowing that James over here was experiencing, let's say, some bubbliness, and that's our movement. So as a group, we do it with James because we're telling James that we're in this with him. So after that, there's a theme. We get kind of grounded in our bodies. There's a warm-up that starts to develop. And as the warm-up starts to develop, that's when I figure out, okay, what type of movement therapy intervention I want to do. So we'll do a specific thing, a specific intervention. And then what makes it therapy is that we actually process what happened. So if I was in a dance studio or a dance class, okay, we do the movement and that's it. In movement therapy, we're processing what happened. What did you notice? How did you feel? What did this bring up for you? So we're actually processing what happened and also giving me permission to observe people's movement styles. What's in their repertoire? What are they holding on to? And what are they letting go of? So you get to see all of that. And I think it's just quite beautiful. That's why I love movement therapy.
Wow. There were so many beautiful pieces to that I really want to highlight. Well, one, I think you as a professional, when you think about counselors, obviously, you have to look at, the minute, the small details of folks' movements, of their facial expressions, of what they do and don't tell you. And it is kind of a dance to figure out where to go from there. But you were quite literally, kind of building out that dance in physical form and rolling with what folks bring and present to the space in that when you're there physically. I love the fact that particular example of when, you warm up with that movement and somebody mirrors it, and that actually helps with building and developing that empathy, right? That empathetic feeling towards others, that again, garnering community and really producing that forming that comes with groups and things like that. Are you typically in a physical space with just groups to, like you said, you do a lot of community work? Do you also do that with individuals? I know you mentioned couples. How do those sort of dynamics vary?
So it's interesting because I'm really finding myself doing a lot of talk therapy at the moment, just because there's a lot of people who want to talk. Sure. And I try to find ways that I can kind of build in movement therapy. And it's not us, saying, hey, we're going to move today, but it's returning back to the body. So when I am in a psychoeducational space or in a communal space, it is amongst a group. And we have people who might say, hey, I think I want a little bit of more one-to-one. Because I do have students that are observing, I also try to be respectful of the community member. So if a community member says, hey, like, I want individual therapy, but I don't know if I want students to be involved in that, that's another conversation I have to have, because my students are there to learn. Yeah. And they're observing the things that I'm doing. So I want to have more space, and I'm claiming it, more spaces to do individual work, because I think it's really important, not just talking about it, but actually feeling through those things. Yeah. And as a movement therapist, something that I forgot to mention is we bring in other aspects, other props, music. So there might be music that a person wants to bring in. There might be specific props that we use to foster safety, to foster connection, and to allow people to come up with some themes.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a lot of things that we use in those spaces that is important to recognize.
Yeah.
But I do want to have more opportunities to do individual work. I love groups. I feel like I've done groups for what, 3 years now? And I absolutely love groups.
Wow.
And I also think it's important to make space for individuals.
Yeah. And a group work is definitely, from a professional point, from a experiential, personal level, those are different types of dynamics, right? Like there's a different dynamic from engaging at an individual level to a couple to a group of individuals who may or may not know each other, and it definitely has different dynamics. But you also mentioned a few different times with the folks who you work with, it definitely feels like a conversation and a partnership where they are bringing up things that they recognize they need to acknowledge and address, and you are helping, like you said, to hold the space for them to do that. So I'm curious around, who are the folks who are looking for you, who are finding you? How do you figure out like who is your ideal client when it comes to movement therapy? Because like you said, it can be for everyone, it can be for anyone, but there are still some specific folks who, who are finding you. Like what do you feel like are the similarities with those folks?
I love that question. So because I am part of a group private practice, we have a phenomenal individual who connects us with people who are interested. So they're able to go on our website and kind of see our bio and the things that we offer. And I want to say the individual or the persons that I mostly attract are Black queer people.
Beautiful.
And it's because I am a Black queer person. So there's spaces that are happening for queer folks, right? But it's hard to find Black queer therapists who understand experiences, not just saying, oh, I'm affirming.
Yeah.
But you're doing the work. You're recognizing
there's a
all
difference.
of the things that come with that.
There's a difference.
Yes, very much so. And I think once people recognize, and I don't want to say that I just attract queer folks. I think there is a need for Black therapists. Absolutely. Black queer therapists specifically. And another thing I think that makes me stand out is the fact that I am a movement therapist. I'm not just, doing traditional therapy where we're talking and you're sitting on a couch and I'm writing down things. Right. I'm taking a more holistic approach. And when we talk about just the state of the world and all the things that we're going through, we need to connect to our bodies because we're seeing so much representation around our bodies not being enough. We're seeing people being shot and killed in the streets. Yeah. We're just seeing grief at an all-time high. Yeah. And I think it's important for us to connect holistically with ourselves. The world tells us this, social media tells us this, maybe our parents is telling us this, but how do we feel? Yeah. How do we feel about ourselves in the ways that we're being impacted by the world? So movement therapy, like I said, is for everyone. When I am doing therapeutic work, I am prioritizing the experiences of Black and brown folks, Black queer folks, trans folks, non-binary folks, marginalized individuals that don't have the privilege of having access to certain things that someone who's cis, heteronormative, right, will have. Right. And I think that is important. I have white clients too, and they know that I'm going to talk about things that relate to their privilege and their power. I call people out, and I'm trying to stay away from calling people out and calling people in. That's what I'm trying to do, is call people into a conversation. Absolutely. But movement therapy is for anyone who just wants a creative and more expressive way of approaching therapy. Not just talking about it, but actually seeing a holistic approach to their mental health and them also feeling empowered to be that vehicle. I see my clients as the experts of their experiences. I'm here just navigating you, and figuring out what I can do to support you. However, my clients are the empowered ones. So
I love that. I love that you name that, because I think validating folks' experiences is, especially with the folks that you're working with the, with the historically marginalized identities that you are working with, it is crucial. It is life-saving work to be able to validate. And like you said, affirming is wonderful and beautiful, and we need it. and validating it and say, I understand you from a personal level. I can understand and you understand that I share an identity that may not be the same as you, that may not have the same experiences as you, but can relate, and I can empathize with you at how this can not only affect you emotionally, but can affect you physically. And need to address both in order to progress both, right? Because we oftentimes talk about, the book called The Body Keeps the Score, right? But we also use that as kind of like a term, like the body keeps the score. The body understands and holds on to what is happening to us emotionally. So for you, like you said, to have this holistic practice and set of interventions around connecting, like you said, the body, the mind, and the spirit is so important, because all those things are affected by each other. And I think that a lot of people often think that therapy is the holistic practice, right? Like I do therapy, like whole body, right? Like, but there's so many more pieces and layers to it. And it's also a great start, but it's also, like you said, recognizing if you need something more, if you feel like there is a disconnect or there is a dysregulation, which means you don't necessarily understand how to manage what's going on in your body and how that connection is between your mind and your body, movement therapy sounds like a great and beautiful way to help address that. But I'm curious around, do you have folks who come to you who may be so disconnected from their body that they're actually resistant to this therapeutic practice? And how do you work through that? How do you overcome that? Do you try to overcome that?
You asking like the most amazing questions, and I appreciate that. Sometimes we shy away or we run away from discomfort. I run towards discomfort because you might be seeing something that I'm not seeing. I'll give you an example. When I was in graduate school, I was in a internship site. I was at an internship site. And this internship site was survivors of brain injuries. So I'm working with people who are disabled, who, again, don't have access to things that I have access to. And again, we can talk about ableism also in movement therapy, because
I would love to get into that too.
But we have people who are disconnected from their bodies. We have people who have experienced so much trauma that they're like, I don't even know where to start. We have people who may not agree, again, with my lifestyle or how I approach things. And I make space for it, because if we don't name it, I'm not doing my job. When we talk about being counselors or just being in the mental health realm, our job is to do no harm. And if a client tells me, hey, Brittany, this isn't working out, like we're not a good fit, okay. And I don't have to tell them why isn't this a good fit? No. And I have to understand that I can't internalize that to mean that I'm a bad therapist. Sometimes it's not a good fit. And I think it's important that therapists make space for those conversations, because there is going to be a lot of differences that we have in the therapeutic space. Some people see movement therapy as something that's childish. I get that a lot. When I worked at the hospital, why are we doing this childish stuff? Because they don't know why. What's the why behind it? They don't know the purpose behind what we're doing.
Right.
Sometimes I get, some men folks saying, well, I don't agree with this. This is gay. And I challenge them, like, what makes it gay?
What makes it gay?
Hey, explain it to me.
Let's walk it out.
Like, what makes swaying your hips gay? Let's talk about it. So I'm a therapist. I like calling discomfort in, because that is the way that I grow. And I can have all these letters behind my name. There's going to be something that I get wrong. There's going to be a connection that maybe I'm not so sure about. So I think it's important when we get people who are disconnected from their body or maybe timid around movement therapy, to create a space that is accessible and allow them space to experience those things. Because sometimes it's a fear of, the unknown. I don't know what this movement therapy thing is. And a lot of times it's, I don't have rhythm. I don't have a dance background. I have a disability. How's this going to work? Right? Part of us being a therapist or being therapeutic is making it a space that is accessible, that is dying to ourselves. And again, the things that we've learned in graduate school, because there are some things that we learned in graduate school that is problematic, and I can't use with people that I use, that I work with. You just can't use that. It's outdated and it's borderline harmful, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I just think it's really important to name it. Because if we're not naming it, there's a silence.
Absolutely. Oof.
I tell my clients, call me out. Tell me when I'm wrong. Tell me that I didn't get something right. I need that.
Yeah.
My clients are my best teachers, hands down, because they are experts of their experiences. And who am I to tell them that that's not what they're feeling?
Yeah.
Make space for it. So
absolutely. Yeah. I think
answers your question.
No, it answers it.
I get so passionate about
expands it. And I can feel, I was just about to like, I feel the passion coming off of you for this topic, for this process, for this specialty, this set of interventions, because it is so important. And I think that you're naming things that I've consistently, as I've been like going through these different interviews and talking to different therapists, it's consistently the same thing. Like there are basic foundational skills that every counselor, every therapist needs to have. And the most important thing is that you feel comfortable, is that you feel like you can speak up, and that you can feel like this is something that you're working through yourself, that you have power, and that this relationship, this dynamic it can be a very power dependent dynamic. And especially if the therapist doesn't name those things, right? Like you said, like name, like you say, call me out. If I say something that you don't like, let's talk about it. That in and of itself is the process, right? I need you to be comfortable to feel like you can tell me what you need, what you think you need, what you don't think you need. And that all is something that we can walk out. But if you don't feel comfortable, if I am not providing the space for you to do that, this is no longer beneficial. And this is, like you said, this could get harmful. And that is the opposite of what we're here to do.
And that is something that I mentioned in my first time meeting with folks. What do you need from me? What's helpful? What don't you need? And what is not helpful? What is actually harmful to you? And I tell people, I want you to feel comfortable. I don't censor people either. If you drop an F-bomb in session, you just drop the F-bomb. Okay, let's make it up and figure out where we can go with this, right? But again, it's making it accessible, because again, it's frustrating the images that we see around therapy. And again, we're come a long way, but we see all these just harmful images of like, tell me what's wrong with you. And like, you see it's this white man on this couch and writing down all these notes. And it's like
on a yellow pad.
That's not personal.
It's not.
I want people in my sessions to feel safe, feel as though they can exist and not have to put on these masks that they're so accustomed to putting on in the world, because the world tells us we have to do those things.
Absolutely. And I love that you keep using the word accessible, right? Like you need to make it accessible and not it absolutely in the physical sense, right? In the physical sense, especially as a movement therapist, you want to make sure folks can understand that movement and dance and expression, even if it is just a matter of controlled breath, even if it's a matter of just checking in with yourself, that is movement. That is awareness of your body. So I love how you talk about and you emphasize that you strive to make sure that your spaces are physically accessible, but also emotionally, identity is accessible. And you mentioned that you work with a lot of intersectional identities, right? Like you're working with Black folks, you're working with Black queer folks, you might be working with Black immigrant, disabled, queer folk. Like there's a lot of different identities there, right? That
older folks, young folks, like
in mixed spaces. Like that is a lot. So when folks are looking for and trying to navigate the overwhelming task of trying to find a therapist, what do you feel like is helpful in learning as if you're coming in and you don't have the hundreds and thousands of hours, what do you think is helpful to be aware of and to keep track of as they are trying to navigate the PhDs, the PsyDs, the MAs, the pre-license, the license, all those different sorts of words and terms, and trying to figure out where to go and who to go to?
Oh, that's such an important question. Part of it is recognizing what you are needing. Like, what do you want to get from a therapist? Again, I am a therapist, and I'm going to say this. Having a therapist is not for everybody. People say that and they use it. Just get a therapist. Just go to therapy.
It's not for
Therapy is not for
everybody. It's
everybody.
not for all the time.
No. And there are other ways that people can have therapeutic experiences that also can feed a need. Psychoeducation. I'm a big advocate for community psychoeducation because, again, we're having dialogue.
Right.
And we're making spaces for all of the things that come with who we are as a community. And a huge part of me being in a space of healing is also growing with my community. And when we talk about the PhDs, the MAs, and all of these other, credentials that are thrown around, it can get overwhelming. So I think it's important for people to do research, understanding what does it mean when a person has a PhD versus when someone has an MA or MS. Are you looking for a therapist? Are you looking for a coach? And that's another story. That we can talk about. I want to make space for the array of experiences and the array of people that we have. Yeah. And I want to say this. People can say that this might be a form of gatekeeping. I'm going to say it anyway.
Safe space.
People need to stay in their lane. People need to stay within their scope of practice. If you are not a licensed therapist or a person that received their master's degree in a certain topic, that does not make you expert in getting on Beyonce's internet and telling these people what they need to do, what narcissistic personality disorder is, because you have not done your research. And I'm also going to speak to the other side. An MA and a PhD in all these thousands of hours does not make you expert. It does not make you someone who's not going to cause harm. I see people licensed in the field who are not doing good work because they're not making space for conversations. They're getting stuck in their ways and they're attached to all the things that they were taught in graduate school. That's not working anymore. We have to figure out what our community needs. So there's a lot of different things that I can say about credentialing. Not everybody needs a therapist. Not everybody needs medication, but there are people who need to be in partnership with a psychiatrist because they need those meds. There are people who can get by with holistic approaches, right? Maybe there's some herbs, there's some other things that can help people. There are folks who need a community space that don't need to be specifically with a professional. So let's stop saying # just go to therapy, because therapy costs money.
A lot of it, most of the time, all of it, a lot of it, too much of it.
Getting on the internet saying these things, how about you figure out how you can maybe help somebody access a connection with someone? And let's talk about coaching. I think there are amazing life coaches out here. Taking a life coach certification for 2 hours does not make you an expert at mental health diagnosis. I'm going to say it again. Please. There's a difference between coaching and being a therapist, a counselor, a person who is certified and maybe licensed in that. We have to stay in our lane. I can't call myself a psychiatrist and say, oh, I can prescribe medication. I cannot. There are reasons why. And I said gatekeeping because some people might see it as gatekeeping. Well, you're not sharing this information. It is not my job to share this information or say that I offer this specific thing when that is not my scope of practice. You can be an advocate, a mental health advocate. However, that does not qualify you to prescribe medication if you never went to school to be a psychiatrist. So I just had to say that.
You know what?
People be getting on Beyonce's internet.
You know what, Brittany? And you said just about all of it. I really don't even know where to start because you drop so many amazing points, and it's true. Like, it's true. That's why my face just keeps changing. I'm like, you said what had to be said, right? Like it's, and I want to name that it. I hope that you naming that is freeing for folks and not so much confusing, because I think that a lot of times folks get one narrative, right? And if they don't fit that narrative, or if they don't feel like that narrative is in association or in alignment with their identity or with their circumstances, then they're like, therapy isn't for me. or I'll never do it again because I had this experience, or I don't, like it's not for me. I don't, it just adds another thing to it. Right. So I love that you named the both and
Yeah.
of so many different layers of this, right? Like
I'm
there's
calling out my people too.
no, yeah, like
I'm not to
therapists.
say that us therapists don't be making these decisions because I can say we because I'm part of
Yeah,
this community.
absolutely.
We're also causing damage by
Absolutely.
not seeing other perspectives and staying complacent in our belief systems.
Yeah. And I say this all the time, psychology was created by cis hetero white men. And we have obviously developed, and we are all getting into the weeds and developing every day. But at the end of the day, that is where it stems from, right? So anything that's different than that is even that much harder to bring to the surface, right? To promote. And so oftentimes, unfortunately, if you are not holding the identities that are in direct conflict with those narratives and are going into these master's programs and doctoral programs and actively working against some of these teachings, then you, in being complacent with some of the teachings and learnings, are going to at some point, unfortunately, do harm or not be beneficial to folks, which is oftentimes why you're saying, why I say, why a lot of good therapists say every therapist isn't for everybody.
And I'm okay if you say this is not a fit, because I'd rather you say this is not a fit than me feel as though we're making progress and we're not, because there is a disconnect, or there's something that you want to say and you don't feel like you're empowered to say that. That's why I tell any mental health professional, I'm saying specifically therapists because I'm a therapist. Mm-hmm. Please get off of your high horse, believing that you know everything. Mm-hmm. You don't. Like, there are so many things that we can continue to learn and grow with. And we have to, again, let go of those things. I don't know if you know this, but movement therapy was created by a white woman.
Oh, wow, look at that.
Marion Chase coined movement therapy when Indigenous Black people of color have been doing this for ages. But because this white woman coined this term, we're going to just consider it movement therapy. When movement therapy has always been movement has always been a healing space for those of us who also have Black experiences, right? Yeah. So as a movement therapist, I'm also unlearning some things, while also there's some things that I can hold on to about movement therapy, of course. There's also things that I cannot use with the people that I hold spaces for.
Yeah. And that discretion, right? There's obviously science, a lot of science behind a lot of what therapists do, but there's an art to it as well, right? There's an art, there's a skill set, and there's innate personal participation in navigating these spaces with the folks that you are working with. And again, because of that, because it's not black and white, and going back to, all the different pieces and elements and aspects that come with looking for a therapist, experiencing therapy, trying to decide if it is for you, if it isn't for you. What should people do if they're like, okay, literally anything is possible, now what? Like, how do I do this? How do I find my person? How do I figure this out? How do I navigate this?
Something that I did, and I'm grateful for my friend for empowering me in this way to figure out the things that are important to me. And I can use myself as an example. Something that was really important to me was having a therapist that understands my queer identity, also recognizing that I'm also spiritual and I was raised as a Christian. And again, I'm having to do a whole bunch of unlearning with a lot that's going there. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about it. Also recognizes that I also identify as a therapist. Again, all of those things that make me who I am, they can understand it. I'm not asking for my therapist to be a Black woman. I'm asking for these things. My therapist is a queer man, and I freaking love my therapist. I actually meet with my therapist tomorrow, and I'm so excited about it.
Love that for you. Love that for you.
Really figuring out what are the things that you are needing. What are your non-negotiables in a therapist?
Mm.
Does this therapist take insurance, or is it out of pocket? Is there a sliding scale depending on your income or how your life is looking economically, all of those things? Recognizing the things that are important to you. If you know you don't have insurance, maybe figure out a way that you can get connected with a therapist who can support you in that way. I'm pre-licensed, so I also take people who are out of pocket.
Mm-hmm.
My fee is a little bit lower, which is great. It's accessible, but there are things that people need to be thinking about. Do I want a group space? Sometimes one-to-one is too much for people. But if I have a space where there are other people who are working through some similar things, I might feel more comfortable with that because I can learn from different people. Am I someone who is an artist or someone who's artistic? Maybe I want to venture into art therapy or movement therapy or music therapy, drama therapy, poetry therapy. There's so many different therapies out there. And it can become a lot. But really focusing on the things that are extremely important to that individual, because it's so intimate.
Yeah.
You know, what we need in therapy might not be something that the other person needs. So first and foremost, starting with that. And I can't stress enough, doing your research, not just online, because again, people be lying. So sometimes getting out.
Yeah, trying.
If you see that there's an event going on and there's a therapist talk, or there's kind of like the event that you just had.
Yeah.
Plugging you, like self-care.
Yeah.
And all the amazing things that you're doing. Finding those opportunities to make connections. There's someone that knows that I go to Uncle Bobby's all the time and they're looking for a therapist. I was at that event, so we were able to connect, right?
Oh, beautiful.
So sometimes it's about getting out there, not just staying in your house saying, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. Okay, what can you do? And again, I also don't want to sound ableist either, because we have people who, again, there are certain things that they cannot access.
Yeah.
We want to be mindful of that. What are ways that we can make therapeutic things accessible to everyone? And I keep saying access because it is not always accessible for people.
Please.
So we need to do something. Oh, just do a Google search. What if I'm impaired and I can't do that? What's the next step? So again, we have to, as therapists and professionals and people in this realm, need to find ways that we can make spaces. And I think that's why it's so important, the things that you're doing at A.Little.Mental, like making spaces for people to gain access to those things that they might not get.
Yes.
Again, I don't know if I answered your question.
I've been working to not use like violence focused language. So I like killing it, crushing it. Like I don't have any other language right now, but like all those things, like you are absolutely surpassing every aspect of my expectations for you and your responses with these questions, because I think they're so important and they're tough conversations, and not enough mental health professionals and therapists have these conversations out loud, where, you know, a lot of times these happen behind closed doors, or they happen in the classroom, or they happen in the supervisions, right? But to bring this out to the public, to the table, to increase access to this information. And like you said, and I appreciate you naming it, is like, that is exactly what A.Little.Mental is about, is like, there is a plethora of information. And now that we are in the year 2023, there is a beautiful amount of diverse, identity aligned, resource aligned, ability aligned information and resources. But now it's a matter of finding them. Now it is a matter of accessing them and having the energy to do that when you've just figured out that you may have struggles that you need to go see somebody for, or you need to address. That in and of itself can be demoralizing. It can be discouraging, and it can be lonely. And like you said, to not know if you're just doing it on, you know, website searches and things like that, like, yeah, that's great. And, you know, we have a therapist directory and we have resource center, you know, at A.Little.Mental, but then there's also the events, right? Where you get into a space with others who are aligned in the sense of, I want to feel better. I don't know how that looks. I don't know who to talk to about it, but I want to feel better. and I want to figure out how.
Let's stop hoarding information. Let's talk about that. If you know of a resource, or if you know of someone that might be a good fit for me, please let me know. Let's stop hoarding information and resources.
Please. Because that's often how we end up finding things, right? Like I will refer my therapist to anybody in my life who will listen. I'm like, oh, me and my therapist go like this. Like we are cool. We are cool. But even like what you said is, kind of coming back to what to look for and how to navigate this. It's what are your non-negotiables? Like, do you have some? Do you know what they are? What are your preferences? Right. And figuring out that. And you might not even know what your preferences are until you try. Right. And so you go to a couple sessions with someone who may be like, okay, if I identify as, even for me, my first therapist was a white woman. And I was like, okay, no. And then the next person for me was a Black woman. And I was like, I thought this would hit, but it actually doesn't. And now my therapist for years is a Black man. Right. And so for me, I thought I had to get somebody who had my gender and racial identity in alignment. And that's another thing, right? Not to throw another thing in, but it might not always align the way you think it does, which is okay.
Absolutely.
It is okay. But what I didn't realize I needed was somebody who aligns with me in terms of our academic pursuits, our personality traits, right? Our family backgrounds. And so, through the element of disclosure, which is when a therapist, presents some personal information to help you and connect with you, I was able to recognize like, oh, like there's the reason why I connect so well with my therapist isn't necessarily because of a gender thing, but because he understands what it's like to go to a predominantly white institution for 4 years.
Woo!
I don't think we have nearly enough time.
2 years of trauma
to even do that right now. But, he also understands what it's like to have to support family members, right? Yes. Going through other mental health struggles, right? So like things like that where it might not be in their bio. So you might have to go in and try something first to then be able to figure out and navigate and feel it out for a bit. But it is a process. I think the overarching theme is that therapy, your therapeutic journey, your wellness journey is a process, and it doesn't have to be in silo. It can be, and I think what you have mentioned has been beautiful, is that it can be in community. And it doesn't have to be sitting necessarily or just isolated, right, to a virtual space. It can be in a physical space, and you can be in movement and in motion with it as well. And so as we're kind of wrapping up, and you have said already so many amazing, beautiful things, is there anything else that you would want folks to take away from, like one last piece of advice or one thing we haven't mentioned when it comes to navigating the alphabet soup of therapists and figuring out how to find yours?
I think the biggest thing is folks knowing that you hold the power. A lot of times we look at people who are seeking therapy as not being enough, or there's something wrong with them. There's something that's empowering you or activating you to call yourself into relationship with someone who can help you. That's the first thing that I can say is you have autonomy. You are the expert of your experience. I'm gonna keep saying that.
Please.
Your life is not just held in a therapist's hand. Make sure that you are, I say dating therapists, dating people.
I do too.
In the mental health realm.
I do too.
If it's not working out, it's not working out. Like, this is an interview. Like, I literally have
couple questions. Evaluation.
I am that client who'd be like, okay, so I read that you did this. So how do you feel about this aspect of my identity? So how would you work with this? Right. Come with questions. You're interviewing them, and it is a privilege for them to be in community and in relationship with you. So again, changing our perspective that a therapist, mental health practitioner, a coach, whatever may have you, has all the power and holds all the knowledge. No, you have knowledge in your experiences, and I'm not going to say because some people don't know what they need. Know that you are worthy and deserving of someone who understands where you're coming from, a community that understands where you're coming from. Maybe it's not therapy. Maybe it's taking a therapeutic yoga class. Maybe it is talking to a friend who has this knowledge. Maybe it is a coach. Because again, I don't want to just say, oh, coaches are, no, there's a reason
value.
There's a reason why life coaches exist.
Yeah.
And it's important that we, as professionals, that we're not poking fun at each other, but we're using each other as resources. If I know that this is not my scope of practice, okay, maybe you need to go see a marriage and family counselor. Okay, maybe you need to go to this workshop. It's happening this Saturday. It's a free event. So if we have access to these things, recognize when we can use that. We have privilege in having all this information. So let's empower our folks to grab a hold to the resources that they have. So that's what I would say, is that my folks are already empowered. They know the things that they have experienced. They might not have an awareness, or they might not know how to access it, but there is something happening in our bodies. There's something happening in our spirit. There's something happening in our mind. And they're recognizing, I can't do this alone. I need someone, somebody, a collective, a village. I need something to help me through this. So we need to empower folks and not feel like it's on us, because therapy is not going to fix you. Fun fact. And I always tell people, I don't use the word healed. Where? Because there's going to be something that is going to activate something in my life. It's a healing. It's a journey. I'm not healed because I got over it and I'm done. No, there's going to be something that happens in life that's going to activate something. So always recognize that we are continuously healing, and we don't get to a place of healed. It's not a destination.
I have nothing else to add. Like we could go on for hours. I really could, but that was such a beautiful sentiment of, it really is a journey. And that's one of the biggest things that I love to say. And like you said, it's not even just about therapy. It's about wellness. It's about healing. It's always present tense, and it's not a linear process. Healing is not a linear process, and it's not a destination. And so, Brittany, thank you so much for being here today, for bringing your wisdom and your realness and your authenticity to the space, to the podcast. If you all would like to learn more about Brittany, we will have some information in the show notes. If you are looking for a therapist, you want to start on that journey, you can go to A.Little.Mental.org, or you can follow us on social media on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram at A.Little.Mental. Thank you so much for being here, and be kind to yourself today. Thanks for getting a little mental with me today. If you would like to find more resources, visit A.Little.Mental.org, and remember, be kind to yourself today.